The voice carried down the hallway, crisp and unbothered, as if it were discussing the weather. "She just doesn't fit. She'll embarrass us." I stopped mid-step, the tray in my hands trembling. The speakerphone was on. Astrid's voice, my eldest, clear as day. She was in the sunroom talking to her sister, Nella. I was supposed to be upstairs, but I'd come down to bring the tea I brewed for us. I stood frozen outside the door. Her clothes, the way she talks. She still shops at local markets, for God's sake. I'm not having Mother ruin the wedding photos. I set the tray down quietly on the hallway table, my heartbeat suddenly deafening. Nella laughed on the other end. "You think she'll even notice? She's been so out of it lately." Astrid let out a sigh. "She won't be invited, and she won't ask. She never wants to be a burden." I turned and walked away. Back in my sitting room, the quiet mocked me. Everything was still in its place. The framed photo of their late father beside my reading lamp. The stack of papers I'd been reviewing for Cassia's trust fund. The untouched Earl Grey steeping in the porcelain cup they'd bought me for Mother's Day, probably with my own money. I sat, spine straight, hands in my lap. The humiliation didn't come in a wave. It seeped in slowly, like ink across linen. I thought of all I had done for them. School fees, first homes, health insurance, holidays, bailouts. I had never kept score until now. They were embarrassed of me. Not just annoyed, not just distant. Embarrassed. Astrid used to sit at this very table to study for her SATs while I made her hot cocoa. Nella cried in my lap the first time a boy broke her heart. And Torin, he once clung to my arm in court when he had to face his first client. But now, I was an eyesore, unfit to be seen, uninvited from the wedding of my own daughter. I reached for my planner and pen. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like their mother. I felt like the woman I used to be, long before any of them were born, and I knew exactly where I needed to begin. The ledger was older than it looked, its spine softened by years of half-finished lists and last-minute reminders, but now it became a record of everything I had poured into them, my children, my legacy. I turned the pages slowly, pen in hand, cross-referencing with digital records on my laptop. I didn't cry. I calculated. Astrid, $180 to launch her event company, another $75,000 when she wanted to rebrand. Countless transfers labeled staffing emergency, marketing push, and once liquidity bridge. Torin, full tuition at Princeton Law, a car when he passed the bar, closing costs on the townhouse he said would help him feel stable enough to start a family. I remembered writing that check. I also remembered the silence afterward. Nella, the least subtle. Trips to Bali fronted as collaborations, video equipment, wardrobe essentials. She asked with emoji-filled texts, voice notes laced in faux affection. And I gave every time, because that's what mothers do. The total was staggering, just shy of $3.2 million over 22 years. A number so clean, so indisputable, it stripped away all excuses they'd ever given me. They didn't rob me. I gave it freely. That's what stung the most. I closed the ledger and stared at the ceiling. I used to find joy in their wins. Astrid getting featured in a bridal magazine, Torin's nameplate on a law firm door, Nella's brand deals. But now I only saw receipts, not just in dollars, but in eroded dignity. It was late when I called Jory Hale. He answered on the second ring. "Varela?" he said, using my last name the way he always did. "I need to see you tomorrow." There was a pause. "Morning or afternoon?" "First thing." He didn't ask why. Jory had been my financial compass since the year after Everett died. When the weight of the business fell on my shoulders, it was Jory who helped me restructure. We'd made the company leaner, smarter. Back then, I'd fought like hell to save what we built. Now, I'd do the same for myself. I stood from my desk and felt steadier than I had in weeks. The wedding no longer felt like a rejection. It felt like a reveal. My children had simply shown me who they were without disguise, and I was ready to show them who I still was. Astrid arrived at 10:15 sharp, her heels tapping confidently across the slate walkway. She had a white pastry box looped in one arm and an exaggerated smile plastered across her face like it had been set with lacquer. "Thought we could have a little mother-daughter morning," she chirped as she leaned in to kiss my cheek, the scent of designer perfume trailing behind her. "Peace offering." I welcomed her in, took the box, and set it gently on the kitchen island. "Cardamom rolls. My favorite. She remembered. Or maybe she just called ahead to the bakery and asked what I usually ordered. That seemed more likely now. We sat at the breakfast nook. I poured coffee, careful not to tremble, and stirred in the cream slowly. Her fingers danced along the rim of her mug, nervous energy masked as poise. She took one careful sip before launching in. So the venue we want opened up a cancellation, the one in Camden, overlooking the bay. It's perfect. Floor-to-ceiling glass, string quartet included. You'd love it. She didn't say you'll be there, just you'd love it. I nodded. But we have to put the deposit down by Monday. It's $452 total, but we're only short about half. I raised my eyebrows just enough to feign mild surprise. Adrienne's family has covered their share, she added quickly, eyes flitting away. We're just trying to close the gap. Her voice softened. I know it's a big ask, but this isn't just a wedding, Mom. This is visibility for both of us. Both of us. I smiled and reached for the pastry knife, slicing a roll clean down the middle. You've always been ambitious, Astrid, I said. I admire that. She relaxed, mistaking my civility for warmth. She thought I was leaning in. She didn't realize I'd already stepped out. We spent 20 more minutes in pleasant small talk. How Cassia was doing, which fabric swatches she'd chosen for her dress, how Nella might be a bridesmaid if she could behave. When she left, I walked her to the door and kissed her cheek, just like always. But as I turned the deadbolt behind her, the calm on my face cracked just enough to let the heat rise beneath it. That afternoon, I called Jory with one word: proceed. Jory didn't ask for explanations. He never did. He simply moved with precision, executing instructions I should have given years ago. Within 48 hours, the accounts were scrubbed clean of automatic transfers. No more allowance to Nella's brand fund. No more mysterious legal retainer payments to Torrin's office. The credit cards I'd once offered for emergencies only were disabled, their balances settled and closed. I reclaimed property titles I'd foolishly signed over for tax efficiency, and every key asset was quietly rerouted under a new trust bearing one name only: Cassia Ilowen Cade. I made sure the paper trail was ironclad. Jory double-checked the clauses. If anyone contested it, they'd be met with reinforced walls and airtight signatures. I didn't shout. I didn't post warnings. I didn't even breathe a word to my children. Instead, I sent a group message, short and sweet, written in the tone of an aging mother craving warmth. I'd like to have dinner with all of you this weekend. Just us. Feels like it's been too long. Saturday night, 7 sharp. I'll cook, Nella replied with a thumbs up. Torrin texted, Sounds great, Mom. Astrid wrote, Looking forward to it. Want me to bring wine? I almost laughed at that one. I responded with a heart. That afternoon, I took down the family portraits from the hallway. Not out of rage, more like preparation. I replaced them with quiet landscapes, things that didn't lie. The dining table was polished. I folded linen napkins just the way they liked. Every detail was intentional, nostalgic, warm, familiar. I knew what they'd expect: an aging woman overwhelmed by emotion, unsure of her place, desperate for closeness. I let them keep that illusion. Saturday was only 3 days away. It would come fast. And when it did, they would walk into the home they thought they knew and sit across from a woman they thought they understood. But they had never truly met me. Not the woman who had built, broken, and rebuilt her world more times than they'd ever known. And now she was setting the table. They arrived exactly on time, all 3 of them. Astrid in a pearl-toned blazer, Nella with her camera-ready smile, and Torrin holding a bottle of red he likely chose on the drive over. They kissed my cheek, complimented the smell of the rosemary roast, commented on how cozy the house looked. It was all rehearsed politeness, perfunctory, hollow. We sat in the living room. I poured tea into the porcelain cups Astrid once gave me, the same set she now considered too cluttered for her own table. I offered cookies, the kind Torrin used to steal from the tin as a boy. Nella took 2 without looking up from her phone. We made small talk for 10 minutes. Cassia's grades, weather patterns, work stress. Then I stood and walked to the console behind me. I returned with 3 folders, placing one in front of each of them. What's this? Torrin asked, eyebrows raised. Something I thought we should all look at together, I said gently. They opened them. Silence followed. Each folder held a personalized timeline: transfers, deposits, mortgage contributions. In Torrin's, a breakdown of tuition, bar exam prep, his first office lease. Astrid's listed business loans and wedding deposits. Nella's had receipts for flights, lighting rigs, brand deal cover costs. Their eyes darted across the pages, some lips tightening, others paling. Then I reached for my phone and tapped play. Astrid's voice filled the room, tinny, cruel, unmistakable. "We can't invite her. She's not refined enough." The pause that followed cracked something open in the air. Torin looked stunned. Nella froze mid-scroll. Astrid sat rigid, her cup trembling against its saucer. That's not," she stammered. "You forgot to hang up," I said, voice calm. "And I listened to 20 minutes of you and Nella dissecting how I'd ruin your wedding photos." No one spoke. The roast in the oven beeped, done. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and looked each of them in the eye. "All these years," I said, "I gave without question. Tonight I'm offering something else." I turned toward the dining room, where the place settings gleamed under the chandelier. Astrid's fork clattered against her plate, untouched chicken cooling in front of her. "You recorded me," she hissed. "You actually sat there and recorded me." "No," I said evenly. "You left the line open. I simply listened." Torin slammed his folder shut. "So that's it? You've been keeping tabs on us like some kind of accountant instead of a mother?" "I've been your mother," I said, lifting my tea, "and your accountant, your lender, your safety net. Now, just one of those roles is ending." "You can't just cut us off," Nella snapped. "We have bills, Mom. A life, rent, partnerships. I just signed with a new agency." "You'll manage," I said softly. Astrid stood. "You don't mean this. You're hurt, but you wouldn't really." "All cards are canceled," I said calmly, setting down my cup. "Property titles are back under my name. The monthly transfers are over, effective immediately." The air left the room. Torin's mouth hung slightly open, as if words had abandoned him. Astrid stared at me like I'd just become someone she'd never met. Nella leaned back in her chair, blinking fast. Across from them, Cassia sat with perfect stillness. She hadn't spoken once. Her plate was clean, napkin folded neatly beside it. But her eyes never left me. Not in judgment, not in fear, just quiet, clear understanding. "You excluded me from your lives," I continued. "I'm simply following your example." Astrid tried to speak again, but her voice caught in her throat. The only sound was the soft clink of Cassia's fork being set down. I rose and began collecting plates one by one, the way I used to when they were little and too tired to help after dinner. But this time, I wasn't clearing a table for comfort. I was making space for something new, something long overdue. Cassia stood as well, silently following me into the kitchen without being asked. She didn't need direction. She already understood the shift. And I knew then that not everything I had given was lost. She was there before I even opened the blinds. Astrid, standing at the wrought iron gate, wrapped in an oversized coat with her arms clutched tight around her. Her eyes were red. She'd either been crying for a while or had just started. But either way, the tears were real this time. I stood behind the curtain and watched her for a moment before stepping outside. The morning air was sharp, and the gravel crunched beneath my slippers as I walked down the short path. I didn't bother unlocking the gate. "Mom," she said, her voice already breaking, "please, can we just talk?" I kept my hands folded over my robe. "You seem to have plenty to say when you think I can't hear." She shook her head quickly. "I didn't mean any of that. It was just stress, the wedding pressure. You didn't think I'd find out," I interrupted, "but you meant every word." Her lip trembled. "You've always been there for us, always." "And that's the problem, Astrid," I said quietly. "You counted on that, not because you loved me, but because you knew I wouldn't stop." She gripped the bars like a child, desperate for recess. "I'm sorry, please, I'll fix it. We'll fix it. Just don't cut me out." "I'm not cutting you out," I replied. "I'm stepping out. There's a difference." Her mouth opened to say something else, but I had already turned. I walked back up the path slowly, the way I'd once walked toward her kindergarten class for pickup. Back then, she'd run into my arms. Now she wept behind steel, begging to be let in. When I got inside, I sat at the edge of my bed, unlocked my phone, and scrolled to her name, Astrid Cade. I held my thumb over the contact. Then I pressed delete. Outside, the wind picked up. I could still hear her faint cries, but I didn't look back. Cassia was already waiting for me. She sat cross-legged on the floor of my study, her school bag tossed beside her, and a legal pad open in her lap. She looked so young in the frame of that room, barely 17, but there was something in her posture, in the stillness of her expression, that didn't belong to childhood anymore. "I heard Mom crying last night," she said softly, "but I didn't ask why." I didn't speak, I waited. She glanced up. I already knew. There was no anger in her voice, just a steady kind of clarity. "They raise us to want what we don't earn," she said, her pen tracing small mechanical circles along the edge of the page. "Nella flaunts. Torrin justifies. Astrid calculates. They think money is proof of love, and when it runs out, so does their loyalty." I breathed in slowly and nodded once. "And you?" "I want to learn," she said. "Not just about money. About how to survive without needing someone else to do it for me. About how to own something, really own it, and not depend on anyone to keep it." She looked up at me again, and I saw it. The steel behind her eyes, the rawness of someone who'd already begun to break free. I got up from my chair, crossed to the filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder labeled Foundations, 1987. The first real blueprint of my business, scribbled margins and all. I handed it to her. "You don't inherit strength," I said. "You build it." Cassia held the folder like it was gold. She didn't smile. She just nodded, like she knew it came with weight. "You won't be like them," I said quietly. "You will not be them." She leaned in and hugged me, arms wrapped tight, like she wanted to fuse herself to that promise. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was guarding a legacy. I felt like I was passing one on. Later that evening, I returned to the ledger. There was one more thing I needed to do before the weekend. The wedding never happened. I read the announcement quietly in the paper, buried beneath the real estate listings. Ceremony postponed indefinitely. Astrid never called. She didn't need to. I already knew. Word traveled fast in small towns, especially when someone from old money found out the bride's version of wealth was borrowed from her mother. Torrin stopped returning calls from his lenders. The townhouse sold below asking. Nella quietly deactivated 2 of her accounts after a sponsored trip fell through. I didn't say anything. I didn't reach out. I had no scolding left in me and no comfort to give. I sold the house a week after New Year's, packed it in 2 days, gave most of the furniture away, and left the key on the mantel for the new couple who bought it. A nurse and a mechanic, expecting their first baby. They cried when I handed it to them. That meant more than any thank you I'd ever received from my own children. The cottage is small, but it suits me. The lake glitters in the morning, and the air smells like pine and clean earth. There's a market nearby that sells the same cinnamon sticks I used to steep in tea when Everett was alive. I've started baking again, just for me. Cassia visits every Saturday. She brings her notebooks, and I give her case studies, mock budgets, copies of my oldest contracts. We argue over interest rates. We laugh over risk analysis. She's better than I was at her age, sharper, calmer. I read more now. Fiction mostly. I write too, in longhand, with ink that bleeds slightly into the page. The silence doesn't feel like loneliness anymore. It feels earned, like a room that's been closed to noise for too long, finally breathing. There are no calls from my children, no apologies, no thank yous, and still I sleep better. But one Tuesday as I stood on the porch watering the mint pot I'd just planted, the phone rang. Cassia was in school, Jory was out of town. The name on the screen made me pause. It was Torrin. I let it ring once more before answering. "Hi, Torrin." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Not hesitation, more like breath held too long. "Hi, Mom." His voice was lower than I remembered, thinner. "I'm not calling to ask for anything, I swear. I just want to talk." I sat down on the porch step, the phone pressed gently to my ear. "All right, talk." He started slow, a murmur of disjointed thoughts. How hard things had gotten, how Nella wasn't returning his calls, how Astrid blamed everyone but herself. Then his voice cracked. "I was angry at first, at you, at what you did. I felt betrayed, but now—" He cleared his throat. "Now I see it. We were drifting, coasting on your sacrifices and calling it success. We thought because you gave it, it was ours. And when you took it away, we called you cruel. But we were the ones who were hollow." I said nothing. He kept going. "I lied about what I needed, about who I was. I thought I was this grown man, respected, established, but I was just a boy with an expensive title and your name behind every check." I looked out at the lake, sunlight resting over the still water. "You broke us, Mom," he said finally. "And thank you." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it shake my voice. "I didn't break you, Torrin," I said. "I stopped holding you together. That's different." He didn't argue. For a moment, we sat there in that quiet, across states, across hurt. Then he asked softly, "Do you think we can start over?" I let out a slow breath. Maybe, I said, but not as dependents, not as beggars at a table. If we start again, it's as people, adults, equals. He gave a small laugh. I'd like that. And for the first time in years, I heard my son, not as a voice that needed, but as a man who had learned to stand. That night, I baked a second loaf of rye, just in case. When it came out of the oven, the crust cracked faintly as it cooled, and I thought about how sometimes things have to break to release what's still warm inside. I set the loaf on the counter, brushed away the flour, and whispered to no one, "It's enough." The house didn't echo back. It didn't need to. Outside, the moonlight spread itself across the lake like forgiveness, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt peace.